It's now time to get back to the future. And to kick it off, I'm going to ask you to put the fire hats on that are on your tables. Put the fire hats on. Me too. So which way does this go? This way? Oh, Lord, have mercy. Selfie? Okay. All right, guys. I'm going to ask you to also stand as I introduce our next speaker. Our very first speaker, actually. Our very first speaker is a franchise icon, a 40-year veteran in the restaurant business. Don Fox began his career as a dishwasher in a Lakewood, New Jersey restaurant. He joined Firehouse Subs in 2003 as Director of Franchise Compliance, rose to COO in 2005, and became CEO in 2009. Under his leadership, the brand has grown to over 1,200 restaurants in 46 states, Puerto Rico, and Canada. In December 2021, Firehouse Subs joined the family at Restaurant Brands International. Don believes that the days of pandemic-induced seismic shifts in consumer behavior are behind us. Hallelujah. Don will share his views on the evolution of the consumer and the future of the restaurant industry today with us. Please give a warm welcome to Don Fox with Firehouse Subs.
We good? There we. All right, fantastic. Man, I love the hats. Where'd you get those? Okay, boy, branding. I'm going to talk a lot about branding this morning. Well, one thing I love about coming to this event is, unlike most events I speak at, this is a very diverse audience in the sense of the type of industries beneath the franchising industry that you're involved in. You know, more often than not, I'm speaking to restaurateurs. Sometimes franchisees, franchisors, but restaurants are the common bond. I love when I get in little sidebar conversations about some of the businesses that you're in. Now, just so I've got a sort of a frame on my audience, so how many of you are involved in the restaurant industry? Maybe show of hands. So definitely maybe less than a third. Terrific. Well, I love that. So great diversity of thought and so on, but again, the common bond is franchising, and that's where I'm going to keep my thoughts centered. You know, one thing that is synonymous franchising is growth. More than just about any other kind of business concept or industry. If you're not growing, frankly, you're dying. You know, being flat, being neutral is not sustainable, and my gosh, you don't want to be declining at all, because as I like to say, no negative trend is sustainable. Eventually, you run out of runway. Right? So it's all about growth, but healthy growth in the right way. And what I love so much about the themes and some of the comments early on in the conference at the very start is respecting the franchisor-franchisee relationship, doing it the right way. Because in franchising, I always like to say, franchising is unique. It's not like anything else. It's a unique business model. And in that business model, both the franchisor and the franchisee have to win. All right, but the franchisor obviously has a very heavy role in that. I love the fact, too, that we've got operators in the room as franchisees. All right, so some of my comments are going to appeal to both sides of that. Now, again, just so I get a sense of the audience, how many of you have, well, now all of you have worn a Firehouse hat, but how many of you have eaten at Firehouse Subs? Wow, so that's great. So a big chunk of the room. So you've got a good frame of reference for what I'm going to talk about. Of course, you know, Firehouse itself, and this is meant to be an advertisement for Firehouse, but it is obviously a frame of reference for me. You know, we've been in franchising almost from the very beginning. It was founded in 1994 by two firefighter brothers, Rob Sorensen and Chris Sorensen. It was their first real serious business venture, opening a family sub shop in Jacksonville, Florida. They made a very early mistake in what I would call the first era of Firehouse, which was 1994 to 2000. They were operating less than a year and they sold franchises. And I would say, and they would admit it if they were standing here today, they had no business being in franchising at that point, with all due respect to everybody who may start out. But they didn't know anything about franchising. They didn't even know anything about really operating restaurants. There were a couple of firefighters figuring it out as they went. But they got swept up in the idea of doing it because people came in, primarily had the restaurant experience, loved it, said, hey, how can we get involved? We'd love to be part of this or invest, or are you franchising? And they went into that little back room of that 1,200 square foot restaurant, backslapped each other and said, can you believe it? People want to go ahead and invest and get it. Let's go out and, what do we have to do? Well, let's go get a franchise attorney and local legal counsel. And they put together, at the time it was the UFOC, the Uniform Franchise Offering Circular, before we now call it the Franchise Disclosure Document. And they sold 3 franchise deals. They weren't even open the first restaurant a year. Big mistake. They spent the next couple of years unwinding that, getting out of that, getting them as company-owned units, built up a decent organization, and got some staff. Finally, got back into franchising in a small but right way in about 1999. And actually in 2000, did something very wise. And you're in essence, you're doing this, at least in part, by being here today. They realized they didn't know everything. They'd become members of the IFA almost from the very beginning. Very important part of their learning culture. But it wasn't. They took a bit of a time out, stopped developing at all, and many of you may know Michael Side, and Michael came in as, I know Michael's been a key player in the IFA for years and years and years, and Michael played a fundamental role in helping teaching them what they didn't know and helping advise them. And then they went forward with the go-forward strategy. That was a lot more sound. That took them in the second era of growth, which is then building up to a national brand, like to 2015. At that point, national. And 2015 till now has been, I joined in 2003. I had 65 restaurants at that point. By the way, a footnote, I was 23 years with Burger King before that. In fact, a bit of irony, fast forward to today, and now we're part of Restaurant Brands International, which of course owns Burger King. Who would have known? Back to the future in so many ways. And maybe that's a place everybody would like to get to. You're all at probably various stages in the room of where you are on your journey. But again, going back to growth, what do you all have in common to get wherever it is you want to go? Whatever your end goal is. Right? It's all through growth. So Firehouse has been a great growth story, and it's built on branding. But I want to remind you, as branding is, because branding, even with that first restaurant, is what got people excited. The Sorensens were very wise in terms of how they designed the restaurant, what the brand architecture was, the image, the hook and ladder. There's a flagship sandwich. A lot of restaurant brands don't, in my opinion, do enough to brand on their menu. But these 3 logos put up on the screen, they are a vivid reminder that a brand in and of itself does not guarantee success. Great brands in and of themselves don't guarantee success. I mean, you look at that screen, Kodak, which started before, at the end of the 19th century, completely dominated what today we would just say was imaging. A 90% market share in film. A variety of ages here. Show of hands if you remember what it was to have a Kodak moment. Huh? It was like hitting like on Facebook. I mean, when you're in the vernacular, in the language that way, how much better brand? It's phenomenal. But where are they today? They're a shadow of what they were. The irony is, they invented digital photography. They had all the They had the first commercial camera. They were actually manufacturing for Apple in the early days in the 90s. Their first digital imaging equipment. So something else went wrong despite having the greatest brand in imaging. Sears started around the same time in the 1890s. selling watches at first, but within a year became a mail order company. Everybody remember the Sears Roebuck catalog? Oh my gosh, as a kid, I couldn't wait to get the Christmas one. All right? You're with me here? I'm dating myself. But man, you loved getting that. All right? It was a small one, but it was chock full of toys. Who should they be today? Some would say Walmart. I don't know. They should be Amazon. They dominated. The equivalent, they dominated. But there's something else. It wasn't about the brand. They were an incredibly strong brand. Number one retailer in the U.S. in the 80s, up until that point in time. And then Blockbuster, they should be Netflix. A little more common story there, but they were completely gone. So these are just three of the most salient reminders that success isn't dependent upon the brand alone. And in franchising, it is so important to remember that. Branding is such an important part of what the franchisor brings to the table of what they've developed. If you're a franchisee, I tell prospective franchisees and, very importantly, existing franchisees in my system this all the time. Look, you may have joined us because you love the brand and it's the brand appeal, but if you think your success is going to be driven by taking that Firehouse Subs logo, which is a visual representation of the brand, by putting that up over the front door and thinking it's all great after that, boy, have you made a mistake. Because there's so many ways it can fail. So, as a franchisor, it is so important to understand what those things are that you have to do well. As CEO of Firehouse, every day I think, how do I make sure, not only that we keep growing, but that we don't become a Kodak or a Blockbuster or a Sears? It's not about the great brand, it's about the other things that are so important, the technical side of working the business. And the same thing is true for franchisees. Again, franchising is such a unique business model. We both have to play our respective roles the right way to be effective. So what is it? There's three elements to what I call our keys for success, and maybe you'll have your own formulas, but I'm going to share with you what I think works, what's worked for me, what's worked for our brand. So the first of the three elements, and this may seem cliche-ish when we talk about mission statements, but they're not. They are fundamentally important. By their very nature, having a concise, articulated mission statement is critical for the team's success, to rally around it. We all should have a mission for our organization, a mission for ourselves personally. What's driving us every day? What's the lighthouse? What do we think about every day when I cross the threshold of that restaurant, what am I in pursuit of? Well, our mission is to carry on our commitment to and our passion for three things. Three things that I know, if we're going to win in the marketplace, we've got to be the best at. That I've got to make sure as CEO, I'm positioning this brand to be number one at hearty and flavorful food, heartfelt service, and a commitment to public safety. And I've got to win. I've got the brand to win. Measuring that is absolutely critical. You've got to be able to quantify it, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. But also for our franchisees, they've got to be committed to that in their marketplace. Because if every franchisee in their trade area, if they believe and then become the number one choice, at the very least in the sandwich category, and I would go beyond that, I don't limit it to sandwiches. I mean, gosh, a heartfelt service in particular. Why should anybody be more friendly? Now, I don't ship smiles in a box for my franchisees, so where is it? I try to inspire it, and I'll talk about inspiration in a moment, but that's franchisees' leadership first and foremost. To have that team, those people, to instill that culture. Because again, why should anybody else be friendly? Friendlier. I mean, does Chick-fil-A have a patent on my pleasure? No! They took it from Ritz-Carlton, for goodness sake. And it wasn't as a marketing ploy or anything else. It was part of their culture. It was embedded. Truett Cathy, Dan Cathy following him, and now Dan's kids. It's baked into them. And believe me, in every single operator that they have. I didn't write this with my team until 2009, 6 years after I got to Firehouse, because I would dare say during my first 6 years there, I wasn't quite sure I could have articulated it as it is today. When I got there, our founders had a very just benign sort of business-like mission statement. We will be number 5 in the sandwich category by, well, the most profitable, blah, 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 blah. Corporate-esque speak. Nothing inspirational to anybody in the system. So, I'll just say this. If you don't have a mission statement, if you don't have a rally point, if you don't have something that everybody on your team can get behind, get it. Get your key players together, get different voices. It was never just about me articulating that. I really needed to have my team involved in crafting that. By the way, every word is chosen with precision, including the first 3, to carry. Because that was the understanding. Point, sorry about the mic cutting in and out here. At some point, because we're all mortal, we all have exit strategies one way or the other, if something would have to be passed on. I'd be passing on leadership, the founders would be. So I know for the long-term success of the brand will outlive me. It will hopefully outlive everybody that's in it right now, just as other brands have done, outlived everybody that's in them. Brands can be, relatively speaking, eternal. But I know that the success is that passion and commitment is carried on. All right. So the second part of the 3-part formula are about values. I think values are incredibly important, and they're as or more important in a franchise system than other types of businesses. Because values are all about the success of relationships. And again, thinking about franchising, a franchisor has things that they do, they have to be good at, interest, things that they need to do for their success, and franchisees have things that they need to do to be successful. 2 distinct parts of the business, but they have common interests and things that overlap. I will use the analogy of a marriage. You can have a marriage between 2 people that have very different hobbies and interests and be very successful. But I would submit in all relationships, if you don't share common values, the chances of success go down dramatically. Because eventually in all relationships, you will have some tough times, some difficult, challenging times. And it is common values, shared values, that help get you through that. So the 5 sets of values that we have that we seek to share with everybody we do business with, particularly our franchisees, are pretty simple. They start with staying customer focused. And by customer, I mean the customer in the restaurants. I'm not going to get into the semantics sometimes of if it's a franchisee, a customer. Frankly, I don't, maybe people might not agree with this, but I don't think so. Because franchising, again, is its own unique model. The relationship, it's not a customer, it's like a retail customer relationship. It's not. It's a contractual relationship between the parties. And you have to both do things unlike any other traditional customer relationship. It's different. So the customer I'm talking about is the customer that you have in common. The customer, in my case, that comes in and buys a sub. And every customer is valued. Our businesses don't succeed. Most businesses don't succeed without a customer making an elective choice. We love our customers. We love every single one of them. And we have to be focused on every single one that ever comes into a Firehouse Subs restaurant or any of your businesses. You love them, because if they don't make that decision, you have nothing. So the franchisee's for naught, all your work as a franchisor is for naught. So we have to always be relentlessly focused on the customer, love them and care about them, take care of their needs. Second thing is setting high standards. You can never be good enough. A lot of times to set high standards, you have to measure against them, and I'm a big of analytics. I know we have Franchise Business Review here today. We've been subscribers, participants of Franchise Business Review for years, because I want to benchmark. I want to know how we're doing. I want to set standards for performance that I can measure. I don't think we have anybody from Technomic in the room today, but I use Technomic in the restaurant industry, again, to measure my brand performance. But I'm always setting high standards. I'm always looking to exceed them, because if you ever get complacent, all it means is somebody else is catching up. So never be good enough, always keep raising the bar. And that's how you keep the distance between you and your competitors. Third part is work hard and learn. The 2 things go hand in hand. Again, a lot of different industries are represented here, but I can speak with authority about the restaurant industry. The restaurant industry is hard work. You don't have a choice in that. It is hard work. Working hard is a choice. And I would say most of you would think your businesses are probably hard work. Most are. So being successful, though, is saying, yes, I'm going to work hard at this, but it is an election that you make. Learning, continuous learning, and again, you subscribe to this because you're here. You should be perpetually learning. There's not a day that goes by that I don't learn something about my brand, the industry. Have an insatiable appetite for knowledge. Curiosity drives everything. The most powerful word in the English language, in my opinion, is why. Why drives discovery. Why drives invention. Why takes you to the right answers for your business. Fourth, values. Giving back to the community. And I love what you were talking about, the work that you did, of course, with IFA's on Franchising Gives Back, the work that you did for Ronald McDonald House. I am a fundamental believer that charity, philanthropy, should be a part of every business. My gosh, we are in a world that certainly has no shortage of needs. And at the end of the day, I'm going to wax philosophical here. We're all spinning around this planet 24 hours a day together on the same ride, on the same rock. And gosh knows, we're all better off if we find a way, each in our own way, to give back something. From a pragmatic standpoint, what we discovered in our business is your customers reward you for it. It's not why we do it. We have our Firehouse Subs Public Safety Foundation. $, of life-saving equipment. So if you've been, a lot of people here have eaten in our restaurants. If you've rounded up to the nearest dollar, thank you. Because probably sum total, if I added up how much was donated just from people in this room, you've probably saved somebody's life. Because every time first responders arrive at a scene, believe me, if you're the person who's being rescued, you are hoping, praying that they're arriving with the equipment they need. I personally, on a mountain in North Carolina, 5,400 square feet, 5,400 feet in elevation, Grandfather Mountain, have a heart attack, I'm in distress, serious heart attack, to get there. And again, God bless my wife, I don't know how she managed to keep it together. But hoping that they were going to have what they needed when they got there. And thank goodness they did. It wasn't equipment that we donated. By the way, funny aside, I love to tell the story. Serious heart attacks going on 45 minutes. Took them an hour and 20 minutes to get there. Fortunately, it started to recede after the 45 minutes, so I could talk and communicate when they got there. And I see these, found 16 of them. And they got to hike up a mile up the mountain to get to me. And then to later carry me off. But I can speak when they get there, and they get on my side, they're putting in an IV, oxygen, and of course one of them is a volunteer firefighter. I said, hey, have you ever heard of Firehouse Subs? I said, yeah, we love Firehouse. I said, oh, have you ever heard of the Firehouse Subs Public Safety Foundation? I said, yeah, they turned us down for grants 3 times. Well, today is your lucky day. You have hit the jackpot, the mother of all grant requests today. So I had the real pleasure, the honor of just a month ago returned to that community, Linville, if anybody's familiar with it, middle of nowhere, and we did a $50,000 grant award for them. But it was a salient reminder, because by the way, we all, if you haven't already, at some point in your life, you'll need a first responder. One way or the other, they will be in your life. So just an example of how it's made it personal for us. And in your own worlds, just find that way. Find that way to give back. Then lastly, for values, treat people fairly. Certainly important in franchisor-franchisee relationship. And by the way, franchisees should always be mindful of treating franchisors fairly. It works both ways. Right? So the way I like to put a ribbon on this is, look, we all should be able to look ourselves in the mirror every day I feel we've done the right thing in our relationships. So we've treated people fairly, fair decision-making, fair resolution to issues. And that's not only franchisor or franchisee relationships, that's the relationships with our employees, with our customers, everybody. We want to live by that. So, know your values. Know what they are. Make sure your team members understand them, that your franchise community understands them, and then live by them. All right? It can't be just token things that you put up there because they look great on a PowerPoint. You have to live by those. I can't tell you how many times I make sure I hold myself accountable to these. There's no hypocrisy involved. All right, the third element is really about blocking and tackling. This, I think, is so important to not become that Kodak, that Sears, that Blockbuster. And there are, as I said, two businesses, the franchisor and the franchisees. Because of the composition of the room, I'm going to spend maybe a little bit more time on the 8 keys for a franchisor, and then I'll talk about 6 keys for a franchisee. What do we start with? And these are in order of importance. By the way, on the color coding, the 3 elements on the bottom, that's what, in my opinion, a franchisor should have in hand before they're ever offering a franchise. All right, so it starts with, well, of course, you create the brand standards, but you've got to be ready to enforce them. And I don't mean that in a heavy-handed way, but consistency is at the foundation, not just of this chart, but of franchise. It's the basis for it. Customers are expecting a consistent experience. Otherwise, why have part of that brand, of that franchise? So as a franchisor, you're devising the brand standards, is what you're licensing for use to a franchisee, but you should be prepared to enforce it. Because believe me, the franchisee who's doing a great job on one side of town knows that the enemy of their business is a franchisee on the other side of town who's not subscribing to brand standards. At least in my business. Because on the one side of town, maybe there's a person who would go to lunch at my restaurant, but they live on the other side of town, and a dinner occasion may be with another franchisee of the brand. And if there's a routinely bad experience, the chances of me having that customer for lunch go down significantly. I love to think that to know the proprietor, get to know who the owner is, but that's far from certain that's ever going to happen. So that's our role. We got to be positioned to do that. Not in a heavy-handed way, in a fair way, guided by our values. But it's very important for a successful system that you're prepared for that. The other half of that line, though, is equally, if not important, inspiring superior performance. Because just doing what's in the book is not going to make the brand as successful as it otherwise would be. You know, on a rainy day, when you see a customer standing at the door of a firehouse waiting for the rain to stop before they go to the car. You've all been there, all right? We're leaving a place of business. It's pouring, raining cats and dogs. You're just waiting for it to, hopefully it's going to subside. You don't have a raincoat with you or anything else. You're just waiting for it to calm down. But you got to get back. So now you're ready to run out the door. You start looking at the pavement, see, hey, are there puddles? What am I going to have to run through? Can you imagine you're in that moment where you're going to run through the rainstorm, what all of a sudden somebody taps you on the shoulder, and it's an employee of the restaurant with an umbrella and says, hey, I'll walk you out. That's fantastic. Now, in fact, that's so powerful in terms of the guest experience, some might say, well, why don't you make that part of the brand standards? Well, I can't because I can't fairly enforce that. I don't know when it's going to rain. I don't know how many employees are going to be on staff. If there are 10 people in line waiting to order, the best decision may not be to have an employee walk somebody out. So I can't fairly enforce it. Again, tied back to our values. So it's not a brand standard, but I want to inspire that level of performance when it's available to be exercised. All right, the second thing is excellent service and training. Franchisors, you have an obligation usually to provide service and training. I don't have the word excellent in my franchise agreement. I'd be surprised if anybody does. But we're no less committed to it. If we're going to do a great job as a franchisor, we should strive for that support and service to be excellent. The third part is protecting the financial model. Again, in a franchise system, by and large, franchisees are having to deploy a financial model that you, the franchisor, have created. You are the architect of it. You're the steward of it. Now, it changes. Businesses evolve, change, menus change, services change. But the franchisee can only, it stays within these guardrails of the business models you've created. So as a franchisor, at the very least, in my opinion, you have a moral obligation, if nothing else, to make sure you're protecting and enhancing the financial model, always with the best interest of the brand and all the partners involved. So if you've got those three things, a set of great system standards that you're ready and able to make sure are applied consistently, you're providing service and training that you're proud of, you've got a core financial model, hey, now I'm ready to franchise. Sure, you got all the assets in place. You feel confident about that. All right, here we go. So what's going to ensure your success? Because will that guarantee your success, those three things? Absolutely not. Because you better start with the right franchisees. Because if I go through all that foundational work and for whatever reason sell to a person who is not equipped to embrace the brand, culture, doesn't have the values, etc., that's all going to be for naught. Your chances of success go down dramatically. And then I better help get that franchisee, again, restaurant business here, but help get them on the right site. Because with all those foundational things below it, even with the best franchisee, if they get on a bad piece of property, it's for naught. It's never going to be optimized. It's never going to be good enough. That is a art and science, really, getting to the right site. There are very few perfect sites. Almost every one of them in some way is a compromise of some sort. Right? But helping a franchisee get to the right decision is really important. The next thing for a franchisor is innovation, because nothing stays static. So I think back to the first Firehouse, what it was like 28 years ago. It was a lot different than it was today. And look at what's happened with technology in particular. Fortunately, I was out in front with my team before the pandemic on building out all of our off-premises experience. You see, Firehouse Subs, almost from the start, did the majority of its business dine-in, which was quite unusual for a sandwich shop. All of my chief rivals, strong majority of their business was to go. We were different. We were serving hot subs, plated in baskets. The ambiance, everything about the restaurant was really built for that. And it was empirically measured as our best experience. But it turned out that, in the end, over time, didn't matter. 2012, 54% of our business was dine-in. And at that point, it started going down every year. In 2015, it went below 50%. And when it did, that was an eye-opener, because I no longer could say the majority of our business was dine-in. It's like, wow. Despite the fact that it was our best experience. Empirically measured by the consumer, evaluated by consumers that way. It didn't matter. That was like a blow to the ego almost. Like, wait a minute, we're so good you don't want to use this? Why are you using this way when you're telling us our best experience is this, but you're using it here? Why? Because there are more powerful forces out there. Digital technology, changing retail patterns, all these things. So my franchisees are counting on us as a franchisor to be on top of that, to understand the marketplace, and then to innovate. And fortunately, we were ahead of that, so when the pandemic happened, we had all the assets, coincidentally, in place, and allowed us to then turn our marketing attention towards those channels of trade, and then catapulted us to great levels of success. Next to last, franchisee involvement. I've talked a lot about what the franchisor's responsibilities are, but I so fundamentally believe franchisees should be involved, have a voice. Maybe not a concrete vote per se, it's not a democracy typically in that sense, but I've got to respect their investment. Highly respect their investment. That investment, paying royalty, I always tell my team, whether you agree with the franchisee or not, being a royalty-paying franchisee entitles you to an opinion, and you better listen and treat it seriously. So much so do I believe in this that way back 2004, a year after I joined Firehouse, to give you a little bit of background, don't do this, what was done before I got to Firehouse. There were individual co-ops in every DMA. That was going to be the plan. Eventually end up in the US with over 200 individual co-ops. A complete disaster, if you're trying, in my opinion, if you're trying to build out a national brand. So I had to try to unwind that. So in 2004, convinced the franchisees, much smaller, a little over 100 restaurants at the time, to collapse those and bring it all into one national organization. And as part of that, being way back then committed to this, I said, hey, look, we'll form a national co-op. You elect the members to it, in effect, setting you up to have your own franchise association. Nobody I appoint. No, people you will elect. Well, you can form whatever committees you want. We'll recognize those as advisory groups for those disciplines. It can be funded, self-funded out of the ad fund. But I paved all the way for that proactively because I think most franchise systems end up with franchise associations, and I dare say if I were to do a scientific poll, most were formed out of adversity. No, do it collaboratively at the outset. But that's all part of franchisee involvement and how I think it's so important. And then lastly, on top, as franchisor, fairness. You'll see when I show you the franchisee pyramid, fairness is not on there because I can't make a franchisee or I can't make anyone be fair. I can hold my organization accountable to being fair. And that's why it's on that chart. So in order of importance from top to bottom, this is our script. This is the fundamental blocking and tackling, the way we execute the business. Now, for franchisee, it starts with people and culture. That's part of picking that right franchisee. And by the way, this is, again, in order of importance, and I'll explain the color again, the three pillars on the bottom. If you have the three things, I'll reveal the other two in a moment. If you've got these three bottom things, you've got the foundation for a firm restaurant, sound business. You want to optimize it. Optimizing it is about building sales. About that. So, people and culture, then operational excellence. You take those great people, that culture, you work every day to be perfect. Will you ever have a perfect day? In the restaurant business, at least, probably not. It's how you respond to the mistakes and so on that can make you really, really great. But you got to go after that with intention. You cannot be complacent. Third thing is profitability. You have to work at being profitable. There's a science to operating a restaurant. You better be doing inventory. You better be managing labor. You better be working technically in a correct fashion with the business model that we crafted. It just doesn't happen by itself. It's not, we didn't license a franchise for a printing press to roll off $100 bills. So, but if you're doing things, you've got a good foundation. Great people, great operation, you make more. You grow sales. Your first step in doing that, be involved in the community. Along the way for us, we were approached, I was back in 2012 by Cornell University. I was speaking at the NRA show in Chicago. And on the topic of our foundation, and they saw some of the data that I put up, and they asked to do a very exhaustive study on us and the connection between our philanthropy and business results. Those findings came back saying the number one highest correlating factor with sales volume was the community engagement. Then they came back 3 years later, did it again, because they wanted to see if it still held true, and it did. So whenever I'm talking to our franchisees, because of course marketing is something that everybody's an expert at. I feel so bad for my marketing team. I said, there's no other part of the business where everybody thinks they know everything. Marketing? No, everybody's an expert. But I'm quite frank with our franchisees. Look, if you're not behind the number one thing that we've shown through research that helps drive sales, you haven't earned the right necessarily for me to really get my ear about marketing. Show me that you're really committed to your community first, because we've shown that that's the most powerful thing for marketing. So, let's check that box. They do that. What's the next thing? System marketing in a franchise system, getting that architecture right is very important for the franchisor to get this design. But in my opinion, very important for franchisees that they are bought into that and they support it. In the earlier years of Firehouse, this was flipped because we didn't have system marketing per se. We weren't large enough. We didn't have national advertising. It was inverse. So for success in the early days, it was all about, look, are we doing grassroots? Are you out there business to business, sign waivers? I can go on and on and on with the local restaurant marketing tactics that it took to be successful. And then we got to a certain point where really in the big picture, support of system advertising was more important. Both have to exist, but system marketing, and then hopefully you mature to a point there where then local restaurant marketing is always done. So that's the formula for those two distinctly different businesses. Common interest, things overlap, but as a franchisor, there's certain things that I've got to do well, and there's things that the franchisee has to do well. So I'm going to finish by talking about one final ingredient, because as leaders, I'm sure you all are, either as for your CEO or founder of your business or high-level people in your organization. To make all this work, it takes leadership. In the absence of leadership, it's just a bunch of slides. It's just a bunch of thoughts. It takes leadership to put it into play. Now, there are, gosh knows, how many thousands, tens of thousands of books on leadership and different formulas, and everybody's got different ideas. So I can only share mine. And they're not taken from a book or anything else. It's just, for me, what I've applied over almost half a century, 48 years, my gosh. I said the other day, so if I get to the point that I'm saying it, now I've said it. It's almost half a century in business. All right, but I'll tell you what worked for me. All right, and it starts with leading by example. Remember, no matter what your organization is, no matter what you do, your capacity to watch and observe the people in your organization, the people that you lead, will never be as high as their ability to watch you. Everything you do is observed, watched, taken note of by the people you lead. And I mean everything. Everything. Never forget it if you want to be an effective leader. And this is in the largest of ways and the smallest of ways. And they all matter. Sometimes the smallest of ways are the most important. When I walk into a Firehouse Subs restaurant, I am cognizant of the fact that the people that are working the hardest, far harder than I ever will on any given day, is the person making subs and taking care of customers, is the general manager running that restaurant. There isn't every penny, every dollar that ever flows into my company comes by virtue of somebody putting mayonnaise on bread. I never forget it. So if I walk into a restaurant, I have a couple cardinal rules, because I know everybody's watching. Number one is, I never take a free meal or a discount in in a franchisee's restaurant or one of my own company restaurants. We have 39 restaurants we own. I would never. Even though we have policies, I would never do it, because I know the demands on that manager and the team, and they're trying to make a budget and a plan, and no, I'm going to respect it. I'm going to be additive to their effort. I'm going to pay 100% when I go in. And the other cardinal rule, I am never, ever, ever going to get in line in front of a guest. Ever. If it took me an hour to order, because every time I was letting somebody else get in front of me, that's exactly what would happen. Because if it was that busy, I'm going behind the counter to help them out. Because what message does it send? If I ever get in front of a paying guest, I'm paying too, but that doesn't matter. If I get in line, I'm going to demonstrate by my actions just how much I value the guest. And I'm going to make sure they get their order that much faster. It's just the small things sometimes, again, can be the biggest things. Second thing is what I call mission command. And anybody, veterans in the room, anybody serve? Maybe show of hands. A couple, thank you, sir. It's hard for me to see with the lights. So common mission orders is a common term in the military. I didn't serve in the military myself, but I'm I think it was mentioned in the intro, authored 2 books on the history of the 4th Armored Division, Patton's 3rd Army. So I've had the immense honor of knowing World War II veterans, interviewing them starting back in the late 90s, some of the people I admire most and learn so much from. But mission orders, said another way, it's don't micromanage. Number one, make sure if people are trained, if you've invested in training and they're equipped with the tools and the knowledge they need, then trust them. Trust their decision making, trust their ability. Sometimes with some, there's always some guardrails. Don't micromanage them. I'll give you a good example of this in the pandemic, which certainly for me, in my career, was the most challenging time I ever faced, as I'm sure for many, if not all of you. I had one mission order that's right after it happened. After the first weekend, start of the pandemic, we were 25% negative that Saturday and Sunday, let's say it was Friday, March 13th, so it's going into March 16th, we're down 25%, and I said, this is not sustainable. So what did I do Monday? I stopped collecting royalties and advertising fees. Because I had one mission that I gave to my team. I don't know where this is going. I don't know how much worse it's going to get. It probably is going to get worse than negative 25. Negative 25 is not sustainable. And if it was, we're going to lose hundreds of restaurants. Remember, there's no PPP at that point. We don't know what's in front of us. I said, boy, their mission is do everything we can to keep restaurants open. It's a simple mission order. And then everything flows from that. Third thing is accountability. You have to have leadership and a system of accountability in your organization. If you don't, your good people are going to leave. Franchisees should be held accountable. You hold yourself accountable. Very important. And then lastly, optimism. You can have a culture. I always boil it down to two choices. Do you want a culture of pessimism or optimism? One or the other. There's no in between. Optimism wins. And I put this together, and I said, that's LMAO. I may have been I've been at 48 years in the business. It does not make me a dinosaur. I know what that is. But there's one other element. Have fun. You know about the F, the LMAO, all right? Have fun, because life is about a lot of things, but at the end, we all work hard, but have fun. I really wish I could have been with you for your event last night. I wasn't able to get up here in time. Sounds like everybody did have fun. Sounds like you're going to have fun tonight. I appreciate you being here with me today, or my being here with you, so thank you very much. Great.